colleague, my client, and I are grateful for each of your time and attention during the course of this lengthy trial. And the best news is that it's coming to an end, right? So thank you for your time. I know it's a sacrifice. We watched some video evidence a few moments ago. Do we know who's driving those vehicles? Sure, you see vehicles that appear to be a white truck and the white Jeep that belonged to the victim. And appears to be the white work truck that belonged to Herbert, my client. But we don't know who was driving those vehicles. We see something walking by the Marathon gas station. We don't know who that person is. State wants everything to fit neatly into their timeline because that's their theory of this case. But that's just what it is. It's a theory. They have video evidence to support that theory. But what evidence do they have that was presented that supports the theory that Tim Smith was murdered at the marital home and his body was then moved in Herbert's white work truck to the apartment and staged? Did Sergeant Pender, who was a detective for a majority of his time in this case before he got promoted to his current position, did Detective Pender ever take the time to process that white truck for blood, prints, DNA? No, he didn't. Did Detective Pender ever take the time to have his crime scene forensic technicians process that white truck? No, he didn't. Did he take the time to have his crime scene technicians process the marital home for these items? No, he didn't. I will say, though, that the Marion County Sheriff's Office did a thorough processing of that apartment. They were there from the time that the body was discovered in the late morning until the late evening that night, almost midnight that night. So 12 hours, give or take. They were there collecting evidence, taking pictures, processing the crime scene thoroughly. And what did that processing reveal over the course of time? It revealed latent prints of value. It revealed DNA evidence of value. And these latent prints of value and DNA of value were linked to known criminal offenders in law enforcement databases, whose names were not Herbert, but instead James True and Lloyd Kelly. And the state wants you to believe that James True it's impossible for him to have committed this crime because it doesn't neatly fit into their timeline. Their theory of the case. You heard from the medical examiner very experienced lady who said that the time of death is determined from the last time that person is known to be alive until the time that their body is discovered and they're deceased. That date range in this case is from Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. 9:30 p.m. was the last time Tim Smith was seen alive by Jordan. Up until Saturday morning, March 25th, 2023. So we have a span of 2 days. And the last time that Rebecca True knew of James True's whereabouts was 9:30 a.m. Friday morning, March 24th. She doesn't know where he was or what he was doing after that. And remember when Sergeant Pender testified the first time around, he said that he had used the license plate reader system to do a search on what he believed to be James True's vehicle, the Cadillac Escalade. And he couldn't find anything on those license plate reader results which would indicate that James True, that vehicle anyway, was in Ocala during the date ranges of Tim Smith's time of death in this case. But according to Rebecca True, that Cadillac Escalade had a breathalyzer in it. And James True is an alcoholic. So when her Volvo SUV was available to him, it would not be uncommon for him to use that vehicle instead. But Sergeant Pender said he didn't even know James True was married. He couldn't remember what other vehicles were there at their home in Parkland when he went there to visit. He was searching for the wrong car. And what about Lloyd Kelly? We heard from Lloyd Kelly. He testified. He's a multi-convicted felon, that he's currently on felony probation, that he and his wife would meet people on Grindr and have sexual encounters with them. He didn't recall Tim Smith, but the evidence is what the evidence is. And his DNA, Lloyd Kelly's DNA, was on that gun oil lubrication bottle that was discovered in the same room where Tim Smith's body was found, in that apartment. Initially, Herbert Swillley was cooperative with the investigation of Tim Smith's death. He had contacted Marion County Sheriff's Office to do wellness checks on Tim Smith. Ultimately, Herbert obtained a key from Jack, the landlord, which was provided to Deputy Hunt, who made entry into the apartment and discovered Tim Smith's body. And we saw the body camera from Deputy Hunt, so we know exactly what he saw. And the state wants you to believe that Herbert had no reaction on that body camera. But if you watch the body camera, if you need to see it again, it'll be available for you all to review as many times as you want. Everyone grieves in their own way. And at this point in time, Tim had been missing for a few days. It was unlike Tim to not show up for work. That was just not Tim. Herbert very well could have known there was a problem given that. So it was not entirely surprising to him that no one was answering the door, that Tim was not responding to text messages, and that Tim was not okay. And speaking of that cooperation that Herbert initially provided to law enforcement, he did the walkthrough of the apartment with Detective Pender after Tim Smith's body had been removed on the day he was discovered. And he pointed out some things that were rather important, because Herbert used that apartment too. He had just been there the weekend before. And Herbert pointed out that the gun oil lubricant bottle was not in the place where it was supposed to be. It was discovered in the room that had a bed in it where Tim Smith's body was. But it was supposed to be in the neighboring room that had the massage table, the toolbox, and the adult wing. But it wasn't there, and Herbert pointed that out. And lo and behold, that item had two different known offenders, either print or DNA on it. James True and Lloyd Kelly. He also pointed out that there should be no bleach. Tim Smith doesn't use bleach, gives him a headache. They don't keep bleach in the apartment. And he pointed out that there were some towels that were missing. Herbert allowed the sheriff's office access to Tim's white Jeep, which was still parked outside in the parking lot. They took pictures of it, and then they released it to Herbert. Herbert allowed Detective Pender to look at his phone, to look at the ring application. But Herbert was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. And I say that because look at what his cooperation did. Detective Pender claims he looks at Herbert's phone, he goes on to the ring application, and he finds these still images of what he later determines, even though he's not a ring expert, determines were deleted videos. And that's an important piece of evidence, if it truly ever existed, because it's the only thing that definitively would prove that Herbert was not inside the marital home asleep on the morning that the state claims, according to their timeline, this murder and body move took place. Yes, you have the vehicles on video. Yes, you have a stick figure walking by a Marathon gas station, but you cannot identify who's driving those vehicles or who that stick figure is. Herbert is damned if he doesn't. He gets concerned. He gets a lawyer. He takes the Jeep, instead of taking it to an appointment with Detective Pender, he takes it to his lawyer's office, Gail Grossman at the time. And Gail ultimately, voluntarily provides the keys to law enforcement on Herbert's behalf later the same day that there was an appointment that Herbert missed, perhaps at the advice of his own counsel at the time. And what happens from there? Detective Pender starts ramping things up against Herbert. He obtains a warrant for Herbert's phone. He obtains a warrant for the ring cameras that are on the property. He is concentrating more and more on Herbert Swillley and Herbert Swillley alone as the primary suspect in this murder investigation. Totally oblivious to the fact that there was another person living in that home who was an adult who he needed to be investigating. And that person is Jordan Swillley. Who else would have had access to those vehicles other than my client? Was there any evidence presented that Jordan didn't have access to those vehicles? Rely on your own recollection, but I don't recall that. And is it not possible that that vehicle movement and activity was unrelated to the death of Tim Smith? Detective Pender did not get the cell phone data for Jordan Swillley until 8 months after he started his investigation of this case. By then, Jordan had gotten a new cell phone, and he was not able to retrieve the location data from her phone for the period of time in which Tim Smith was killed. And then there was an effort made to say, well, but I didn't do that because Jordan had a lawyer. Until the defense pointed out that, well, Sergeant Pender, you didn't learn Jordan had a lawyer until May the 30th, 2023, which was more than 2 months after Detective Pender's initial involvement. And a little bit more on this timeline and theory of the case. Is there any direct evidence showing that my client, Herbert, was at the apartment that the couple used for sex with others on either the evening of March 23rd, 2023, or the early morning hours of March 24, 2023? And the answer to that question is no. No one saw Herbert there during that date and time frame. Herbert was not captured on any video surveillance at or outside the apartment during that date and time range. There's no evidence placing him at that apartment during the period of time that the state claims, according to their theory of the case, that the body of Tim Smith was moved and placed there. How does one know that Tim Smith was even murdered at the marital home? How does one know that Tim Smith was given these drugs by the defendant? Sure, they have the statements that the defendant made to people that he thought were his friends, to people that he did work for, that he was unhappy, that he was having marital problems. That is what we call circumstantial evidence and or evidence of motive. But where is the direct evidence that he drugged his husband? Where is the direct evidence that he killed his husband at the marital home? It's not there. But there was direct evidence presented that James True is a violent guy. There was direct evidence presented that James True has used physical violence against another. There was evidence presented that James True threatened to kill another. Another thing that is rather interesting is that when they did that very detailed processing of the apartment, the victim, Tim Smith, had two phones. One was a red iPhone, that was the work phone, and the other was a Samsung Galaxy, which was his personal phone. There was a extraction, a Cellbrite extraction done on Tim Smith's personal phone, but there was no extraction done on the red iPhone, the work phone. And Jesse Newbanks, one of the state's witnesses in this case, he testified via Zoom on a previous occasion. There was a motion to perpetuate his testimony because he wasn't going to be available during this trial period. He's in training because he works for Homeland Security now. But they couldn't get into the iPhone to download the data because they couldn't unlock the iPhone. So we don't know what is or is not contained on that red iPhone. And we don't know whether or not Tim Smith was communicating with other people on that red iPhone. Because after all, Tim was going to be getting a new job very soon. Perhaps any concerns he might have had about using his work phone for personal reasons Now I want to go back to Jordan. Jordan presents as a person who is stuck in an uncomfortable position, who is along for this unfortunate ride because of her ties to Tim Smith and to her father. But if you look at the evidence, what do you see? You see that Jordan, after her dad was charged with this crime, obtains a durable power of attorney for her father, a copy of which is in evidence, and she's empowered by that durable power of attorney to act as her dad's agent, to handle his monetary affairs, to buy and sell assets, motor vehicles, motorcycles, items that the defendant had. And because the defendant was charged with this crime, he was relying on his daughter to help him manage his affairs. And what does Jordan do, even though she has this fiduciary obligation to her father to act in his best interest? She sells off all the stuff and keeps most of the money for herself. She even sells the land that the marital home was located on without telling her father anything about it, without his permission or consent. She misrepresents to other people that this was a gift and that she would not receive any proceeds from the sale. But she testified that she did. She received cash from a realtor and she put it in her bank account. She claims she gave some monies to her father. Another interesting thing about Jordan is that Jordan is the second beneficiary of Tim Smith's life insurance policies with Hartford. Meaning, if the primary beneficiary, which is Herbert, is ruled out because of the Slayer statute, because it says a homicide, and because Herbert is accused of committing that homicide, then who's next in line? Jordan. So in addition to the monies she's acquired as her dad's power of attorney, she stands to gain even more if her father is convicted of murder. $333,000 more. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a motive to lie. That is an interest in the outcome of this proceeding. And some of Jordan's testimony against my client is rather damning. Particularly what she claims Herbert told her the morning of Friday, March 24th, 2023, when the two were talking about whether or not Jordan had heard any noises the night before, and what she claims her dad told her to say to lie for him. And the fact that she later would claim that she was with her dad when he dumped some prescription pill bottles at a convenience store trash can. Jordan has a motive to lie for her own financial gain. The state has introduced a wealth of evidence in this case. More than 70 exhibits. But it's not the quantity of the evidence that is presented. It's the quality. The video evidence, most of it, admittedly, is good quality. But it still doesn't tell us who's driving those vehicles. It still doesn't make the link to what if anything, was in that white truck? Or what, if anything, was in that white Jeep? And we still don't know who it is walking by that Marathon gas station. And the quality of Jordan's testimony, where she states that my client made these statements to her, which would be indicative of involvement in Tim Smith's death, are not reliable. So, with these compilation of things, with these alternate suspects, with these persons who have their own motivations to bend the truth, what does all that come together to be? It comes together to be reasonable doubt. And Tim Smith was well loved, and his death was very tragic and unfortunate. And he was well supported then, he's well supported now. But this case is not to be decided upon sympathy for his death. It's to be decided upon the facts as determined by you, the jury, individually and collectively, and then applying those facts to the law from the jury instructions. And if you do that, and you still have a reasonable doubt, let's say you look at everything and you say, you know, if I could just look at the still photographs that Detective Pender claims that only he could see. If I still need to see that evidence, that's just one example of a reasonable doubt. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your time and attention throughout this busy week. I ask that you return the only true and just verdict in this cause, and that is a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
1 second, please. Does anyone need a break before we have Ms. Burns' final argument? Okay, Ms. Burns, you may proceed. Do you need the overhead projectors?
Yes, please.
Let me know when you're ready for them to actually go on.
Thank you. I'm not going to stand up here and rehash everything that I've already told you. I just want to address a few things that Mr. Klein talked about. What I gather from his closing argument is that this is the defense. James True did it. But if James True didn't do it, then it was Lloyd Kelly that did it. And if it wasn't Lloyd Kelly that did it, then it was Jordan Swillley. All of those things can't be true. And with Jordan Swillley, I'm not sure if the defense is she did the murder for some reason, or she's lying to get the money. Let's first talk about lying to get the money. If she was lying here so she could get the life insurance money, so her dad would get convicted, certainly she could make up a better story than what she said. How about just saying, hey, the Ring doorbell camera went off, I looked at it, and I saw my dad dragging Tim's body through the living room. That would do it, wouldn't it? I heard yelling. I heard screaming. I looked out the door. I saw my dad strangling Tim. I mean, you don't leave your common sense out the door. Use your common sense. If Jordan wanted to frame her dad so she could get the money, certainly she could say something better than, he told me to say I was home all night and that I didn't hear any noises. Now, he kept saying, who's driving? Who's driving the white truck? So I guess if Jordan's driving, then she's the murderer. Is where I guess we're going with that. So that means Jordan drugged Tim somehow. While Tim and her dad were sleeping in the bed, she somehow got Tim out of the bed or started beating him up, strangled him, moved his body, got it in the truck, and then drove it to the apartment and did all those things. Did that happen? Is that a reasonable doubt? I mean, none of that happened. She was 19 years old. She was devastated. And she lost a man she loved and considered a second father and her dad at the same time. And she couldn't support herself. She told you, I sold that stuff. I had the power of attorney. And she used the money to get an apartment. She currently lives in an apartment with her boyfriend and is a server at a restaurant in the Villages. That's where Jordan's at right now. And if she wanted to lie to convict her dad, she certainly could have had something that would put the nail in the coffin, but she didn't do that. And she didn't murder Tim. She had no reason to murder Tim. She loved Tim. She'd known Tim since she was 8 years old. There's been a lot made about why the white truck wasn't processed. Okay, say it was processed. Tim's DNA's in there. The defendant's DNA's in there. Tim and the defendant's blood's in there. Okay, it was their truck. That's not going to tell us anything. Don't be held up on what's in the white truck. We would expect everybody's DNA to be in there. Think about this. Where's that rug? Where's the missing rug? What was on that? We don't know because it's gone. We know that the defendant was certainly at the landfill right when it opened the next morning at 7. What was he doing there? And where's the rug? And why did he not tell anybody about that until a couple days later? He eventually told Sergeant Pender, but they were already talking to everybody, getting video footage, canvassing the neighborhood, because he did not tell anybody he went to the landfill when they first talked to him. Why didn't he tell anybody that, and where is the missing rug? And Tim's work phone. We talked about Tim's work phone. They couldn't get into it. They tried. The defendant himself said, we don't use that phone. That they asked him, what's the number for Tim's work phone? And he said, I don't know. I don't talk to him on that phone. That's his work phone. So now the defense wants you to believe he's going to get a new job somewhere else, so I'm just going to start trying to pick up men on my work phone now. I'm just going to switch from my personal phone to my work phone because it doesn't matter. That makes no sense at all. And if Lloyd Kelly or James True did it, we have to remember they had to bring bleach with them too. Because there's no bleach in that house. The defendant brought the bleach. So those two masterminds got some bleach and then came up here somehow and murdered Tim. Now the last thing I want to talk about that's very important, it's been made a big deal about.
You ready for the thing?
Yeah. Yes, please. Is the still shots that Sergeant Pender saw on the defendant's phone. You just heard a lot about that. I want to just talk a few things about that. Remember that when the defendant handed his phone over to Sergeant Pender, and they were both looking at the phone, the defendant had already accessed the Ring doorbell camera at 3:46 Friday morning. So he thought he had gotten rid of all of the video. He didn't realize that the still shots had been left on there. So he made that mistake. And remember, too, that by the time they got the search warrant for his phone and they looked for those, they had been deleted. So after Sergeant Pender looked at the phone and saw those, the defendant got his phone back. And then when they looked at it, he wised up, he deleted them. They were gone. Now what's important about this is the timing. And the defense says we're trying to make everything fit. Well, everything fits perfectly in the timing. Sergeant Pinder said, when he looks at the still shots, at 2:25 a.m., the defendant's truck was not there. 2:25 a.m. But then he said the next one was 2:28 a.m. And the truck was there. The defendant's truck was at their residence with a male figure. Sergeant Pinder wrote that in his report right when the investigation was happening. He wrote those times in his report. I saw at 2:25, no truck at the defendant's house. Then at 2:28, I saw a truck with a male figure. Later on, well after he wrote that in his report, we get the video from Pedro Vasquez. And guess what? At 2:27 is when the defendant's truck is passing by Pedro Vasquez's house, going back home. Which would mean the defendant's truck wasn't there at 2:25, like Detective Sergeant Pinder wrote in his report, but it would have been there at 2:28. I mean, the minutes of that, 2:25, 2:28 is what Sergeant Pinder writes in his report. We get the video, and at 2:27, that happens to be passing by Pedro Vasquez's house. There is no chance, it is not possible, and Sergeant Pinder's very smart, that he somehow figured that out and knew that that video was going to show that at 2:27. He wrote those times down in his report before we ever had this video. And it fits perfectly with what the deleted still shots from his Ring camera. $2:27, right here. Here comes the defendant. This is the defendant's truck coming back to his own house. He was not there at 2:25 when Detective Pinder said, I saw that still shot and the truck wasn't there. And there we go, pulling right into his house at 2:28. Exactly what Sergeant Pinder said he saw on the defendant's phone. It couldn't fit any more perfect than what you have right there. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you.